once you set up the whole exercise and you really warm up and you're in a groove, it feels wrong to just break out of that for a different exercise. It's like you're cheating on your spouse or something. You bonded with this one exercise, you're like, nope, see ya. Nah. So it seems like people do understand what progressive overload is, but I think that people don't really think of it as like as expansive as it really is, because it's from what I've kind of like understood, it seems like everybody just kind of thinks of progressive overload as like adding weight to the bar. So as long as you're adding weight, then you're going to be progressing. And of course that's true, but progressive overload is so much bigger than that. I mean, it really encapsulates any sort of training variable improvement over time. So say you increase reps, that's another one. And that's also another common one that people talk about. But you could not only increase weight and reps, but you could increase time under tension. So kind of how long your set is. You could improve your technique in terms of maybe a slower eccentric and a faster concentric. And then additionally, you could improve things like reducing your rest periods, could be a form of progressive overload. And the list goes on. You can increase, I'll keep going. You can increase your training frequency. You can increase your volume over time. You could change up your body part split or whatever split you're running. So there's just so many facets that come into progressive overload that people tend to not really neglect, but just not discuss. Everybody just talks about getting stronger and adding weight, but it really transcends so many more things. So whenever you are stepping foot into the gym, just try and progressively overload in some way. And I can really simplify it. What it really comes down to is just going harder. That's all it is. Just go harder in some way. And you don't have to improve in every single facet of your workout. Like you don't have to add weight, add reps, reduce your rest periods, get out of there quicker, do better form and time under tension. Like that's not possible. That's maybe possible like once in a blue moon when you're really, really like amped up, but that's just impossible to achieve day in, day out every single time. Unless you're like a freaking genetic phenom that's on a billion different drugs. But for the average individual, that's just not going to be feasible. So just kind of focusing on one thing at a time. And sometimes it's not going to come to you, Sometimes you're not going to know what you can improve on each day. But I think that if you just kind of go into the gym with a mindset of, I'm going to work harder than yesterday or work harder than the last time you did that exercise or that lift, then I'm sure that it's going to work out for you in the long run. I used to really get into the nitty gritty of, we're going to write this program and we're going to have progressive overload implemented. But sometimes your body just says no. It's having an off day and it's not ready to increase reps. Maybe it wants to just do form for that day. And if you didn't have it programmed in, then maybe you wouldn't actually consider succeeding in that avenue. So I think that walking into the gym with an open mind and just a lot of enthusiasm and passion. And I know that guys, like going to the gym for years and years, sometimes your passion can be kind of zapped, but I think that just finding ways to keep the spark alive is really important, and it can help you with your progressive overload endeavors. And I just want to underline this whole discussion by mentioning that progressive overload is probably, if not, probably one of the most important training principles, if not the most important training principles to improve in the gym. I mean, that's all it really is. It's improvement, but especially to see outward progress in terms of like, more muscle mass, less fat and stuff like that. It's really, really, really important to do so. So additionally, let's just stay with this programming principle discussion, and let's talk about something like splits, because that's been a topic that I've always been obsessed about. I've always wanted to get the perfect training split for the maximum amount of progress in the gym to get the look that I want, to feel how I want, that not only fits into my schedule, but also just works well for me. And I've tried pretty much all there is. I've done the bro split, which is just, training one body part on one day. I've tried push-pull legs. I've actually done that one many times. I've tried upper, lower. I've done a little bit of full body, and the list goes on. I've made my own where it's like, we're doing a quad day, we're doing a hamstring day, whatever. You can get super creative with it and develop whatever program you want. But I think that instead of looking at like what's the best training split hands down, you need to look at certain programming parameters that work for you. And as long as the training split hits those parameters the way that they need to be hit, then you know that you have yourself a winner. And it fits in with your schedule, of course. And the bottom line is that if you can't stick to a training program, it's not for you. If it doesn't fit in your schedule and things might come up like work or whatever, then it's not for you. You have to find one where, say you have like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, where you can work out, and the rest of the days of the week you can't. Well, then those days are the days where you're going to have to program in lifting, and the other days you shouldn't try to program it in because you're not going to make it. Because consistency at the end of the day is going to be the most important, one of the most important variables for long-term success. If you're missing workouts, then you're totally tanking yourself. So for instance, let's go with that example. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. You could, for those specific days, I'd recommend doing a upper lower rest training split, because that way you get a 2 times a week frequency and each body part is kind of working in conjunction with each other. Say you do like quads and then you do like chest, or you do like back or something. That doesn't really make as much sense as doing like quads and hamstrings, since on a lot of quad lifts, you may be working your hamstrings too. So kind of pairing up the body parts together, then achieving a 2 times a week frequency is like very, very important. And on top of that, you want to be including enough volume throughout the week where you can recover from it. And having rest days is pretty important too, especially if your volume isn't distributed well. If your volume is distributed well, you could theoretically work out as much as 7 times a week if it fits into your schedule. And that's what I'm doing. I'm just making sure that my volume doesn't exceed or underperform for where I'm at in my journey. So by identifying which days you can work out, I think that's step number 1. Do that, and then step number 2 will be what body parts or what exercises or whatever should go on certain days in order to hit a 2 times a week frequency. And I didn't explain what that means for any of you that don't know. Basically, it's just how many times you're hitting a muscle group in a given week. So say we're doing the upper lower thing. You'd hit upper on Monday, so you'd be hitting your chest 1 time. And then you'd be hitting upper again on Thursday, so you'd be hitting your chest a 2nd time. That'd be a 2 times a week frequency. You want at least a 2 times a week frequency, as shown in the data, to produce like pretty substantial growth. So, once you figure out your days and then you figure out which body parts go well together for you, and then you get your 2 times a week frequency, then we can start talking sets. And ideally, you want to hit around like 10 to 20 sets. It depends on where you're at in your journey. If you're a beginner, you could do as little as 10. If you're more advanced, you may want to get past 15 up into that 20 range. And so that's just going to kind of depend on yourself too. Sorry, this is all just really dependent on where you are particularly at in your lifting journey. I can't make this for you unless you send me all of your information and stuff. But once you get that down, then the next step would be like, let's figure out, let's evenly distribute this volume. Say you are going for that 20 sets a week, then you probably want to do 10 sets on day one for the given body part, then 10 sets on day two, so that it's evenly distributed. You could kind of offset it a little bit if you know that you're going to have like a lot of rest time or something, or if, maybe something comes up, then you could offset it. But the important thing is to hit that total weekly volume. That's the most important variable in all this. But the reason why we kind of split it down the middle like that is because the longer you're doing a workout for, the more and more fatigue you're going to naturally get. We're all human, we're not robots. We can't just go forever. So once you're towards the end of your workout, you're probably so gassed that you can't keep that standard high, that standard of high quality sets that are actually going to lead to growth. And then pretty soon you'd be getting into what we call like junk volume territory, where, any sets past a certain point are just going to be so low in quality that they're going to account for almost nothing, at least in terms of hypertrophy and strength and power. You're still exercising, so you'll still get like a minor cardiovascular benefit and whatnot, but you're not going to be doing what I'm assuming your goals are for working out. So we evenly distribute it. Now what? Now we got to look at the actual exercises. You want to pick exercises that are really in tune with the body part that you're trying to work. So for the chest, you want exercises where you're kind of, getting that humeral adduction, which it looks like you're just pressing something off of you. And you probably want a combination of a compound lift and an isolation lift. And ideally, you want to put the compound lift earlier in the workout, since it's using more muscles, and thus it requires more energy. So by hitting it when you're fresher, that's a good rule of thumb. Versus isolation lift, since it's only using one joint and likely one muscle, then you don't need as much energy in order to hit that really hard. So you can just do the isolation lift towards the end because you don't need as much energy to hit it. So it just works better that way. And then in terms of how many exercises you should be hitting in a session, I'd say like on the upper end, 5 or 6, and on the lower end, 1 or 2. And then I tend to gravitate towards like 3 or 4. I kind of in that middle range, but sometimes I'll go above if I'm really like excited to be there and I just want to keep working out. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it'll go a little bit under, but I prefer to stick to that 3 or 4 exercise range. And then I tack on, 3 or 4 sets as well. Some people, they'll jump on an exercise and only do like 1 or 2 sets, which I never understood. There was one time where I was training very low volume with high intensity, in fact, a couple years ago. And I would only do 2 sets, but it still didn't feel right. Even though the sets were like super balls to the wall, it didn't feel right. And the reason why it didn't feel right is because once you set up the whole exercise and you really warm up and you're in a groove, it feels wrong to just break out of that for a different exercise. It's like you're cheating on your spouse or something. You bonded with this one exercise. You're like, nope, see ya. Nah, I like to, and it just doesn't make sense to me, because if you're doing all these warm-ups for an exercise and you're really in your groove, why would you break the cycle and then have to go and warm up on a different exercise? I don't know. It's just crazy to me. So unless you're doing like a very low volume approach on purpose, then that makes sense. But otherwise, I would just do like 3 or 4 sets. Theoretically, you just do one exercise for like, between 5 and 10 sets for the volume allocated for that day, and that would be fine. However, I think that it's important to get different angles and include some isolation lifts in there too, in order to not overly fatigue yourself. Like if you just walked in and you just did 10 sets of squats for the quads, that level of immense systemic fatigue is likely going to bleed into the following few days of workouts and probably mess with how much effort you can exert on those lifts. And we don't want that, guys. That's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for overtraining and eventually burning out and wanting nothing to do with lifting. So I was structured in terms of, let's start with a compound lift. Let's do like 3 to 4 sets of that. And then let's do maybe like a less fatiguing exercise, a more stable exercise, like a machine exercise, machine press or whatever it is for like 3 to 4 sets. And then finish off with however more sets you need of just like an isolation lift. So say we're sticking with the chest example, you could do like the pec deck machine for like 3 or 4 sets. And that could be like an effective workout right there. Right there. 4 sets of a bench press. And then 4 sets of a bench press, 3 sets of a incline machine press, and then 3 sets of the pec deck. Boom, you got it. So if you're doing that and you're, scheduling everything, then what comes next? What else could we modify about this training program? Which, by the way, that's a great starting point. And most people stop there. But if you want to go further, we could be talking periodization, which is very important for advanced lifters. If you're more new to the gym, it's not going to play as large of a role since your body is going to adapt to anything. But periodization essentially just means that we are changing the variables over time in order to keep the stimulus fresh upon our muscles or upon our body. Because periodization isn't just for hypertrophy, it's for strength, it's for performance outcomes, it's for, athletes, whatever. So in this case, I like to modulate my repetitions and sets. So you could start out with this is a common one. You start out with a high amount of volume, so a high amount of sets, and then over the course of 8 weeks or whatever, you slowly decrease the number of sets. And then while you're doing that, while you're decreasing the number of sets, you're increasing the weight over time because the volume and intensity are inversely related. So whenever one goes up, the other one should naturally decline because that's just how the body works. It can't be good at everything at once. So you could kind of throw in a tactic like that if you're so inclined to do that. Another form is just changing up repetition ranges, changing up exercises over time, keeping things fresh. If you're just doing the same thing over and over, the same workout week in, week out for, theoretically, your whole life or whatever, eventually your body's going to adapt and you're not going to get the same stimulus, you'll get the same stimulus, but you're not going to get the same outcomes out of it. And I don't know, being stagnant kind of sucks, especially when you're still putting the effort in. So that's kind of like the last stage there. And then beyond that, I suppose that, I guess not the last stage, you could throw in some training blocks. So, people have a strength gaining phase of 4 to 8 weeks, and then a muscle building phase of 4 to 8 weeks, then an endurance phase of 4 to 8 weeks, in order to build up different systems of the body over time, and then, take a break and then do the other system. Because when you build muscle, a larger muscle is inherently a stronger muscle. And then a stronger muscle can also be a larger muscle. So by building each component individually, it's going to complement the next component. Then endurance is just a great way to be able to increase your work capacity over time. So anyways, I think that's going to do it for today. I just kind of wanted to talk about some more technical stuff when it comes to training, some stuff that I don't really get to talk about in most of my training videos because they're more like hands-on focused of what I actually like to do and things that I think about. And this video is more of, you know, I can just kind of talk about additional things that I want to. So anyways, guys, see ya. Have a good one. Bye.